Hello, this is Rick Powers coming to you from my home office for Western Technical College. And I'm making a video about introduction to probability. So then when we ask questions, what is a probability and how does it work? The basic idea of probability is whenever we have uncertainty, then we think about ways that we can mathematically measure that uncertainty. And of course, that's very much what happens in statistics because we're measuring numbers that change all the time. And so um, we don't exactly know what's going to happen. And certainly we experience this all the time. If you've ever played Monopoly and it's like, well, I need a five to win the game. You roll the dice, maybe you'll get a five, maybe you won't. You just never know about that. Certainly, if we think about things like cars, am I going to need a muffler in the next 6 months? I don't know the answer to that question. Um, Nobody actually does. Nobody can actually tell exactly what's going to happen in the future. Um, is it possible that I would be able to get some kind of a special artistic experience that I wasn't anticipating? Um, Maybe a certain band will come to town that I didn't know they were going to be here. And then, wow, could that happen? It sure could. I don't know. I don't know if the Packers will win their next football game. Um, they're doing pretty well right now, so yeah, they probably will, but we don't know. And so we live in a world where outcomes are uncertain. And so then when we're measuring things in statistics, it's part of that whole process. But then we have mathematical tools that can understand something about what might happen, what are the possible things that can happen in the future. And so then we have things like measuring the results of taking certain kinds of medicines or even certain kinds of behaviors. If you say, okay, here's a group of people, they walked for 15 minutes a day, and let's compare them to a group of people that walked for 5 minutes a day. So then we'll see what happens, but we don't know what's going to happen to each individual, but we might be able to see patterns of change. And so then we have a change in probabilities, right? If you exercise more, then it'll lower the probability of heart disease or something. And so then, well, it doesn't mean we know if someone is going to have heart disease, but we can change our expectations of what we think might happen. And we always have questions about context, right? What kind of walking did the person do? And um, is all kinds of confounding variables or whatever else. But to think about some of these things and some of the probabilities that might change, um, again, these are mathematical tools that we can use to think about and to make some decisions about things. Insurance companies do this all the time, right? They set their rates about housing or car insurance and all these things about how likely it is for certain people or certain kinds of driving to have certain accidents. And so then they have different rates, right? Different insurance rates based on that. And there's a big question about climate change and how if that would affect the probabilities that certain areas of the country will have more natural effects like floods or anything like that. And so then you ask questions about the changing in the probabilities, right? And there's so many things. Um, Safety on the roads, certain kinds of construction. If you construct this road to be wider, or if you put in a bike lane or anything else like that, put up signals for pedestrians, all those things are changing probabilities, right? Sometimes these things can be politically difficult, though, right? Because when you say, okay, we want to put in this kind of a road or something like that, and people are like, but no, that's inconvenient for me, or it doesn't work for me, or it's bad for this neighborhood to have this kind of a thing in the neighborhood or whatever else. And so then you have to kind of work through all this stuff. Um, pardon me. Sports is a major thing, right? The probability of in football going for it on fourth down, or uh, probabilities of if you have certain groups of players on the basketball team, if this group plays together, is it going to change your probability of having good defense or good offense or whatever else? Um, but just as human beings, we struggle sometimes with probabilities, not knowing what's going to happen. Certainly, when we went through COVID-19, that was a big deal because nobody knew what was going to happen, and so then we would say, okay, let's do this to try and stop the spread or slow the spread or whatever. And people didn't necessarily know how it was going to work or if it was going to work, but they figured it was a good idea, and then all kinds of consequences from that. But um, it just it just created, I mean, if you want to say to a certain extent, a social trauma that I don't know that we'll recover from necessarily in the next 50 years. But eventually people will probably not remember it. But just the whole idea of the uncertainty and the discomfort. And yet the idea of probability is helping us to just manage and to think about uncertainty in such a way that we can't eliminate uncertainty, but we can think carefully about it, and we can make some decisions based on what we do know about what might happen, right? And so we're going to be studying these things using these tools, and it applies to medicine, to economics, and sports, and everything else, to be able to understand and then to put some numbers on the different choices that we make. And so hopefully, as we go through the different things and you become familiar with more of the ideas, the formulas, and the tools and everything, that it'll help you to get a more of a grasp of what probability is and how it works. Certainly, I'd welcome any questions that you might have about things. We do have some reasons to be skeptical of information, and so we live in a world of uncertainty, so we don't always commit to something. But at the same time, there is some operational certainty that we can have, where we're close enough or it's good enough that we can move forward and we can do something with the information that we have. So balancing those things out using our tools will be good. So yeah, please let me know if you have any questions or have any more thoughts about this.